Our gospel reading this morning comes from the book of Mark. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups and pots and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within the human heart that evil intentions come: fornication and theft and murder and adultery and avarice and wickedness and deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." This too is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise be to you.
This passage always reminds me of my grandmother. She was a strong advocate for proper hand washing. When you came into the house, before eating, after any event in the bathroom, if you were in her home, or for that matter, if she was in yours, proper hand washing was always observed. The most uncanny thing is that she could look at you and tell whether or not you'd washed up. She'd fix her eyes on yours and reveal the deep secrets of your personal hygiene. If you'd run the water but failed to stick your hands in, she knew. If you'd done a quick but less than thorough dousing, she'd ask, "Soap?" If you were preparing to eat an apple and she was 2 rooms away, she could sense it and she would yell, "Wash your hands." After a while, we realized that it was totally useless to try and deceive her. I wonder if people felt the same way about Jesus. The early church father Clement of Rome wrote that God sees straight through our evasions to our deepest inward intention. That's what happens when Jesus talks to these religious leaders. They've come to Jesus, a fellow Jew, with an honest question. Why don't your disciples keep the custom of hand washing? Hand washing was its own sort of purity test. It drew the line between the clean and the unclean. You could tell a lot about a person just by watching how he washed up. It wasn't always this way. These purity practices began in order to help God-fearing Jews keep the law. They had become something very different. And despite all of their good intentions, the Pharisees had traded love of God for love of something else. Jesus wouldn't put up with it. Kate Bowler is a young mom and a scholar of the American prosperity gospel, and she writes about her experience after she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. She details the reactions of her friends and acquaintances. Her associates in the world of the prosperity gospel, that's a theology that promises health and wealth to those who have enough of the right kind of faith. They assured her that if she prayed the right prayer and believed the right way, she would be well. Her academic colleagues, they researched the problem. They believed that if they had the right information, they could find the cure. And then there were her hippie friends. These people were convinced that she had not eaten the right amount of the right variety of kale. They wanted to get her on a round of smoothies stat. Everyone wanted to make sense of her diagnosis and assert that she could control her life. We all want to control our lives. And we think that we can do that by making the right choices or behaving the right way or having the right information. And not only that, We want to know who's in and who's out, who's clean and unclean. That way we can ensure that we land on the right side of that line. We'll give ourselves to whatever promises that certainty. Martin Luther said, whatever your heart clings to and relies on, that is really your God. This passage forces us to ask, what do we rely on to make sure that we're in the right? Is it our politics, our manners, a particular parenting philosophy, a 7-point strategy to be the best boss? Are we always careful to say the right thing? Do we attend protests, give our money away, invest our money wisely? Many of these are good and helpful things, but as soon as they become a means of control, an idol that we worship to help us achieve our particular notion of clean, they are deadly. Now, if you believe that you aren't concerned with being right or justified, think for a minute about your family, or any time you shared a living space with another person. Nothing brings out my desire to prove that I'm right and good like the warp and woof of daily life. In fact, I wonder how many of us in this room right now could note the number of times we took the trash out this week, and maybe even note the number of times that someone else has taken the trash out this week. Are you ahead or behind? Do you have a tally? I was with my family of origin this week. I'm almost 37 years old, and I still don't like it if I empty the dishwasher and the credit goes to my little sister. Our desire to prove ourselves worthy and good and righteous, all of that goes down to some of our deepest questions and insecurities. Am I loved? Am I worthy? Am I accepted? Those are important questions. They matter. But on the wrong track, they can also fuel some of our very worst impulses. Even if it's subconscious, most of us assume that if we can get it right, we can fix ourselves and the people we love. If we're good enough or competent enough or faithful enough, our lives will play out as we hope or even as we think we deserve. So we quit loving God and we start to love whatever it is that might get us the best end result. Before we've realized what's happened, we're serving something so much smaller than the God we've come to know in Jesus Christ. I wonder if the disciples expected Jesus to have their back. Every time I read the text, I ask that question. Maybe they'd hoped for one of those epic scenes, you know, when your brilliant buddy comes out and eviscerates his opponent and proves that you're right. My guys aren't defiled. You people, it's another story. But that's not how it plays out. Jesus upends the way that the Pharisees see the world, to be sure, but he doesn't let anyone off the hook. He calls the entire crowd to him to make sure that everyone can hear. And then he says, nothing out there defiles you. Evil comes from the inside, from the depths of the human heart. And he rattles off a list that should make all of us cringe. Obscenities, lusts, thefts, murders, adulteries, greed, depravity, deceptive dealings, carousing, mean looks, slander, arrogance, foolishness. One thing is uncomfortably clear. This list is big enough to include us all. Nobody gets left out. You see, from God's vantage point, there's no division between the clean and the unclean. No herding technique that puts us on one side or the other. The line between good and evil runs right down the middle of every single one of us. And no amount of hand washing is going to fix that. This is a hard word. But the thing about Jesus is that behind even his sharpest pronouncements, there's always an invitation to something very, very good. Here, it's an invitation to grace, to come and live in a world that isn't structured by our ability to be good enough children and parents and colleagues and friends and citizens. This is a world structured on God's transforming love. This invitation puts us all in the camp of those who are hopelessly dependent on grace, those who can't control and order their own lives and who are worn out from trying, those who know what's in their own hearts and shudder, but who long to be made new. These people are in the Gospel of Mark. We've seen them already. They're the ones who are mobbing Jesus, crowding him. They're about to crush him to death because they know that trusting him and his healing love is their only option. That's an honest picture of every single one of us. Flannery O'Connor is a writer who gets grace. She gets its complexity and its beauty, and she knows just how hard us humans will work to resist it. Her story, Revelation, is a great example. It begins in a doctor's waiting room in a small southern town. There's a middle-aged, middle-class white woman, Ruby. She's waiting with her husband, Claude, who has a sore on his leg. Ruby is the kind of person who waits by making small talk. And the undercurrent of her conversation reveals that she is sizing up everyone in the room. The white trash woman and her grandkid, the disgruntled college student reading a book with an ugly look on her face, the young black man who runs errands for the doctor. In her head, she ranks them in order of importance, making assumptions about their work ethic and their habits and their income. What becomes clear is that Ruby is undoubtedly pleased with herself, certain she's cracked the code to living well. She idolizes cleanliness and order and good manners, and she thanks Jesus for it all. And then, suddenly, right in the middle of one of her pompous pronouncements, the college student stands up and screams, "Warthog from hell!" She throws her book at Ruby's head. She'd had enough. Claude takes Ruby home to recover, and while she's icing her head, she watches Claude water their pigs. "I'm not a pig, I'm no warthog," she thinks. "I'm not like those other people." But you can hear her uncertainty. She's not sure. The event in the waiting room has made space for her revelation. And then, in the strange glow of twilight, she sees, as if through the heart of mystery, a swinging bridge extending upward from the earth through a field of living fire. On it, there's a vast horde of souls rumbling towards heaven. White trash clean for the first time in their lives, and sharecroppers in robes, and all sorts of crazy folks shouting and clapping and leaping. And there in the back, she saw herself and Claude marching with dignity and order and respectable behavior and singing on key. And then she could see by their shocked and altered faces that even their virtues were being burned away. Grace robs us of everything we've tried to stack up in our favor. It robs Ruby of her carefully crafted understanding of herself and the world to give her a more beautifully complicated one where neither our best qualities nor our worst offenses are the things that really matter. Grace works on us so deeply that in the end we quit fixating on ourselves and our relative merits or shortcomings, and we start to truly love God. You know, Jesus doesn't say, "You know, guys, don't worry about all this clean and unclean stuff. You're right. You're pretty good people. You got pretty good intentions." Jesus wants so much more for us than to just be good people. And he doesn't see us as problems to be fixed. We are his beloved children. He respects us enough to tell us the truth, and he loves us so deeply that he offers us grace. This is not the flimsy, easy sort of grace we're accustomed to. It's not the kind of grace that doesn't cost anything to the person giving it or the person getting it. This is a profound, complex, and transformative grace. Grace that strips us of anything we use to stand in its way and invites us into its mystery. Here, we'll never know who's in and who's out, or be able to secure our position, and we have to chuck the idols that promise we can manage just fine. Stepping into this grace requires that we trust God entirely. You and I both know that we can't always understand God. We certainly can't control God. But we are loved by God. Love that was made clear on the cross, and that's a love we can trust. When we trust our lives to God's grace, we find grace that is strong enough to change us, all of us, the stuffiest and the most broken, and everybody in between. God's grace can meet the evil in our own hearts and send it packing. That's the beginning. The moment our hearts of stone are set on fire and they start to yearn for the right thing and to love what they are made to love. The good work of grace is played out right here every time we take communion. It's at this table that God says to us, "Look at my body and my blood poured out for you. You can trust me. You are worthy. You are loved. You are accepted." And then God says one thing more. Come, take, eat, and be changed. Amen.